a little more in depth to the RIC triangle that you just mentioned, of the revival of the RIC triangle, viewers. If we speak of the three countries, what does Russia, where does Russia currently stand? It's desperate for allies amid the Ukraine war, because there's been constant pressure from the United States to end this very war, not just the United States, but also the European Union, to bring an end to this war that had begun with Ukraine. If we speak of China, China currently is seeking economic opportunity. That is one of the highlights in terms of what are they looking for from this RIC triangle. And then if we look at India, India currently is seeking for flexibility amid the tariff blows, because we've seen the current economic circumstances with a 50% tariff being levied on India, the highest at this given point, by the United States. If we look at the thin trust factor, however, there are certain bones of contention that have existed in the Indo-China relationship, which might become a hurdle in the RIC triangle, which is at first being the fact that India-China soldiers had clashed in Galwan back in the year 2020, and then the second part being rare earth curbs put on China that in fact end up threatening India's growing EV sector. So these are the 2 points of contention, one may call, or rather a hurdle that might in fact end up posing itself in the RIC triangle. So yes, we come back to you, Gaurav. Gaurav, I would want to shift the focus from just Russia, India, China, or even the broader broader outlook we are seeing on the geopolitical landscape to Indo-China. We are looking at a time when there have already been talks of disengagement and de-escalation on the borders. But the point is, can we take verifiable measures at the borders to make it a long-lasting one between India and China at this point?
You know, in India-China, that's a very pertinent point. India and China, the relationship has seen many ups and downs from the beginning of our ties. If you look at the border, cooperation agreement, that was border defense cooperation agreement that was signed when former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh came to India, it was seen as a confidence-building measure. When 2014, President Xi Jinping came to India. He was in Ahmedabad. The relationship, it was assumed that since Chief Minister Narendra Modi and, the Xi'an governor, if I may, at that point of time, Xi Jinping, they were very strong, both as heads of state and government, as Prime Minister and President. The relationship would only set to rise, and it did rise at one point of time until there were a series of incursions by the Chinese, whether it was happening in Chumar at one point of time or it was happening in Depsang at another point of time. 2017, it happened in Doklam, which lasted 73 days, which led to the Wuhan summit between the two, and it was said that this was the Wuhan spirit that will take this relationship forward, and the relationship would rise once again until Galwan happened in 2020. And after Galwan 2020, you saw all the confidence building measures were thrown out of the window. There were multiple friction points where the situation went absolutely out of hand in most places. Then, if you notice, when Tawang incident took place 2 years later, India was on top of the situation. Border, India was able to mobilize more than 50,000 troops, deploy its heavy artillery, bring in rockets. China brought in its rockets. The Air Force moved to its frontal position. So after the, and incidentally, I've had the privilege of covering almost everything on ground. Covered Mahabalipuram on ground, covered 2020, the Galwan incident and the standoff in Ladakh. The Tawang incident in 2022, covered that on ground. Then the Kazan thaw, we covered that on ground. And now we are covering SCO here on ground. So the hope once again is that there will be tangible measures, verifiable measures that will be taken place. So disengagement has happened, yes, but there is no de-escalation. And what does de-escalation technically mean? That all the heavy weapons that have been moved closer to the borders, they would then be sent back to their peacetime locations, or they would move back so that more confidence-building measures can be put in place. And that strategic direction has already been given by the heads of state and government to their respective teams. The SR level dialogue that's happening, the special representatives, NSA Ajit Doval on the Indian side and Wang Yi on the Chinese side, the member Politburo and state councillor, and of course special representative of the president on boundary talks. So all of those conversations are happening. Will it lead to tangible de-escalation. De-induction is a long way off. Even if de-escalation were to happen, and de-escalation also has a kind of a arithmetic to it. It has a grammar to it. And what is that? China, because Tibet is a plateau, is able to mobilize forces faster. So they will have to move back even further. India, because it has to cross the mountains and then deploy, will move back lesser of a distance. And all of that arithmetic is all military strategy. It has to be worked out and agreed to and has to be mutually verifiable. Right now, there are, there's a buffer zone that's been created. And those who argue that the buffer zone is only on the Indian side, a buffer zone, as the name suggests, both sides are not going to their respective areas, or they're verifying each other's point and then going so that there's no friction. That does not mean that we have moved back or they have moved back. Both parties have moved back and have decided not to come to a particular point until there are more CBMs in place or confidence building measures in place. Right now, the conversation is, how do you keep the borders calm? Peace and tranquility at the borders essential to ensure that the trade ties move forward. While India will have to give China more access to Indian markets, India is also seeking reciprocal access to the Chinese markets for Indian goods and services. The trade deficit that stands at a whopping almost $100 billion, $99.6 billion. We want that to be addressed by China. And if that is addressed by China, if India gets more access to the Chinese markets, point one. Point two, the fact that we also want this relationship to be more even-handed. While some measures have been taken, China had stopped the supply of fertilizers to India. China had stopped the supply of heavy earth boring equipment or tunnel boring equipment to India. All of that had stopped. Magnets and rare earth minerals, that had stopped. All of that is now has resumed and is in the process of being resumed. We are still hoping more will happen and India will get more access to the Chinese markets. Should that happen, then yes, this thaw will lead to a reset. Until then, it remains a thaw. There is no reset in India-China ties, at least not just as yet.